So thanks everybody for joining us for our seminar series here at the University of San Francisco. Today we're really excited to have Feng, who is the CEO of Interview Query, present for us today. And as all of you know, as you're using Interview Query, it's an interview prep site specifically for data enthusiasts, so data engineers, data scientists, and so forth. And Jay has spent 5 years working at companies like Monster and Nextdoor as a data scientist before starting Interview Query. So please give him a round of applause.
All right, thank you.
This mic is dying. Can we use the other mic?
Thanks, yeah. I'm glad we got to do this mic check problem too, because I feel like every time I do this, it's either a video problem, so I'm glad I got to do it in person with like a mic check problem. Everything. But thank you, Victor, for introducing me, and would love to talk about basically acing the data science interview today. I think most of everyone is onboarded onto Interview Query, hopefully, and knows about us. But what I wanted to talk about today was basically the Interview Query's journey, what our mission is, basically how you can use it, but also talk a little bit more about the tips and tricks to how we can basically get interviews and get jobs in this time as well. Yeah, I guess we'll fix this as well. All good. All right. So we'll jump in. First thing though, I'd love to know if anyone has any interview experiences like recently, maybe in the last 2 weeks, that they want to share, or any questions just up front that I can address in this interview. And I know it's pretty intimidating with the entire class here and talking about your interview experience, but I'm sure that we'll all go over it and we'll all use it to learn. But would love to know like what the challenges are, just mainly because I can point out some stuff in the presentation or on Interview Query that we can use to address it further down the line. So,
I do have a question.
Yeah.
And that is,
Sorry, what's your name?
Adam.
Adam. Okay, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. So my question is like sometimes when I've done like not the last 2 weeks, but like farther back data science interviews, depending on what industry I'm interviewing, they'll ask me like industry specific problem solving questions. How do you prepare or get ready for like when you interview a supply chain question, and then asking like a supply chain management or optimization question, when that's not really your forte?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and I can jump into that later as well. But for me, at least, what I've been using is essentially like, let's say this is a company like Walmart or something, right? Like they have supply chain, right? They have that kind of case study. Usually, how I would prepare for that is to find companies that are of a similar nature to that have kind of questions that have been asked that you can find, just basically case studies online. And we can show you how to do that on Interview Query as well. But essentially, it's a great way because it's a litmus test in terms of being able to see exactly what gets asked at all these different kinds of companies. And when you're looking for these, a lot of it is just about pattern matching, right? So you're looking at supply chain stuff. You want to find other companies that focus on similar problems that are in the same space as well. And being able to read the solutions and look at other kind of people's answers as well in that space is really helpful. So more so than not, I think if you have an idea, an understanding of like what you're interviewing for in the future, you can generally do a little bit more research into like the case studies that would be asked at these companies and similar ones that are in retail and such. So hopefully that answers your question. But we'd love to know, like, did you have this within supply chain, or were you interviewing at a company at like Walmart or something like this?
Yeah, it was a big like manufacturing company. And they asked me some supply chain related questions, like around logistics operations, or about just basic supply chain questions of like do you have a general understanding of how it works? Kind of thing.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
there was some like math optimization problems. I don't know if you want me to actually go into detail, but that.
It's okay. Yeah. No, it's helpful. I mean, I think it's also an interesting game because, right, when we were doing interviews, a lot of it is about how we can best answer the question given constraints, and a lot of that could be like about a subject that you don't know a lot about as well, and they might not expect you to know a lot about it. But it's also framed in the way that you're talking to someone who probably lives and breathes in that ecosystem, so it's much harder for them to like pull themselves out of that scenario into a place where they didn't know about it before, potentially. So thanks for that. So I'm going to jump into kind of like the general agenda of interview query and how we ace the data science interview. So kind of how I started interview query, a brief background was about myself, was basically in 2015 I graduated from my bachelor's. I found a job in an analytics startup, kind of jumped into a company called Jobber, which was like Tinder for jobs. So you'd swipe right to get a job, and you'd swipe left to pass on a job. And we eventually got acquired by Monster, to which then I jumped ship to Nextdoor, and then eventually started interview query. And throughout the whole process, a few key insights I learned was that one, a lot of people that came into the interview didn't really knew the concept. So I think almost all of you guys know the concepts, know the material, knew data science, but a lot of the times when I was interviewing them for new roles, they actually just didn't get quite the structure right, or in terms of how they're presenting their answer, or the fact that they knew SQL, but they didn't know how to optimize their queries in some ways. So there's always like a few things that are kind of off. And I think I attributed that to just basically not having the experience of doing a lot of interviews previously. And I think one reason, and one of the best ways to actually get really good at interviewing is just to continue to do as many interviews as possible and just practice it through repetition. Now, that's really hard to do in data science, I would say, specifically because, especially now, it's really hard to get interviews. So getting that like first interview or getting that like fifth interview until you feel really confident about your answers, your structure, your presentation is going to be super difficult now because you're just trying to get that practice. And so we can talk about how we can get to that repetition, but that's kind of how we decided to build interview query, was to really build up that interview question bank and get everyone to practice these questions and practice how to answer them correctly in a way that is kind of helpful for industry and lands you that data science job as well. So as we said, kind of our mission was to basically help everyone across any kind of data science field, whether that's data engineering, machine learning, or any kind of data professional, product manager also kind of needs the interview. So here's kind of like the 4-step process that eventually, after a few years of iterating on this and talking to hundreds, maybe thousands of candidates that are in data science, how we found like was a 4-step plan. And everyone said this plan every single time, and I started trying to pitch it all over social media, and eventually I was just like, it's really easy. It's literally just 4 steps, guys, in front of you. At the same time, I feel kind of like Tony Robbins pitching like a 4-step plan, but in general, it's definitely a lot of work, right? But overall, it's just very, very simple in terms of the action steps that are needed. And so the first one, as we're going to go through it, is researching the data science role. 2, kind of like benchmarking your guys' skill set in terms of what kind of role you want to get to. The 3rd is just building like a curriculum or a small little daily study plan, right, to study for these interviews. And the last one is to just get interview feedback to get better. Right? So I'll jump into the first part on researching the data science role. Now, I'd love to know just kind of how many people have showed up for an interview and thinking that it was like maybe one role, but instead was asked questions that were completely unprepared for. I feel like this is pretty common. I think one of the biggest challenges that we hear is that people show up for data science interviews and they get really hard, like leak code, algorithm type problems, and they weren't prepared for it. Or maybe they showed up doing like 100 leak code problems the night before, and then they asked some like a business case or a supply chain optimization problem, right, instead. And so this happens a ton. We've actually kind of like divided up the data science interview question types into around like these 8 to 10 different buckets. And so if you see here, we have SQL, this is kind of data manipulation. You're going to get pandas questions here as well. Then we got machine learning concept questions, case study questions, just theory questions. We got Python. This is more about like scripting. So you're talking about like taking a string and maybe data cleaning it a little bit. So it's a little bit different than algorithms and data structures, which we also have here, which is much more very familiar, I think, programming-based questions with VB code style, difficulty around logic. And then we got more stuff like probability, stats and A/B testing, and then system design, right? And then lastly, I want to mention product, which is also more like business case studies as well. And so these different kind of groupings, you can kind of mix and match them as you want, but like data science roles, data analytics roles, even data engineering now falls into just a bunch of different combinations of these different kinds of question types. And so when you're researching the data science role, at least for us, what we want to do is actually find ways that we can map out what those kinds of different question topics relate to the different skills. Now, I just want to take a brief thing in between that agenda just to talk about general industry stuff that we're seeing as well. So before, we probably see like in terms of getting the data science job, that's also really important, is just getting to the interview, right? Which we are seeing more of a plateau now as of late versus before. And I think that's where we're also seeing the shift in terms of this data that we're gathering, right? So basically in 2022 and in 2021, we saw a huge rise in just these, big tech Feng companies in terms of having so many different kinds of jobs. The economy was going great, right? Everyone was making a ton of money off of crypto, and their TC was off the charts. And now we're kind of in this more realistic period of the bubble popping, where if you look at the kind of non-Feng jobs, they've actually plateaued, and there's actually a decent amount of them in the red over here. But like the actual Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google jobs have kind of basically disappeared. And it's kind of more of a reality check in terms of the fact that now we're not all just preparing for like the same types of companies, but we're seeing this long tail of other companies that are not Feng, that are still in tech and startups, that we now have to like kind of figure out what these general archetypes for these data science roles are as well. So before, we'd have like Facebook's data science job, and it'd be like so common, like literally if you, like every single time someone has had an interview for a Facebook job and they come to me, I'd just be like, well, this is exactly what's gonna happen. This is like the lunch break that you're gonna get. Like this is like what you're gonna get for food. Like there was a whole itinerary down that was just like, they had operationalized it to a T. But now we're getting to like something where you don't really know maybe what the structure is, or potentially it's gonna be a lot more convoluted, because now it's not gonna be like 80% of jobs coming from, let's say, 5 companies. It's going to be 80% of the jobs coming from 100 plus companies. And so now we have to focus a little bit more on like researching the data science role to really understand what's going to actually happen in the interview. Some like a great meme that I love is also just like this one right here, which is really indicative of just how the technical interview goes. It's a lot of work, in preparation, in terms of the amount of time you're spending into it, while the actual job is so much more collaborative, so much easier. It's not just an intense test that you're going through, right? And I just want to talk a little bit more about the data science roles here as well, because I think there's some distinction I'd love to make for every single person who's interested in going to data science, what kind of like specific things that they want to do on their day-to-day. And so one of the common roles that we see are like data analysts versus product analysts, right? So product analysts spend a lot of their time with product growth, health metrics, basically focusing on commercial outcomes, where data analysts actually focus on analytics across the whole spectrum, right? So for example, if you're a product analyst, let's say for Facebook, right? We're focusing on product metrics such as like, then we're looking at the metrics of Instagram, how well is it doing, monthly active users, daily active users. Whereas if you're a data analyst, you're probably doing some more general reporting here. So you're not focusing just on Instagram, so to speak. You're actually maybe looking at the reports of multiple products here, and you're actually looking at like what different things can we do for the future of Instagram, let's say, to improve the product over the long term, so it works well with like the other tools that are, or the other like Facebook products that are out there as well. The second part is kind of more of this higher level data scientists or machine learning engineers. We have data scientists that basically don't work on engineering as a top priority, but just try to extract knowledge and insights. And we got machine learning engineers that focus on engineering as the top priority, and they basically take the ML models and deploy them. We have research and applied research as well. So research is kind of like the people that work under maybe OpenAI right now, right? They're basically doing a lot of creation of large language models, whereas applied research are the people that are basically taking the OpenAI models and then actually trying to find solutions to practical business problems. And so those are kind of like the different roles. And the first kind of like advice I have for that, just to kind of wrap it all up, it would be to basically research the roles in terms of what you want and at the company, and then understand exactly what kind of things are going to come up in terms of the different question topics and across those different positions as well. So on the second part, we have more about benchmarking your skills. So let's say that you got the job, or you got the interview, sorry, at a company, say like Google. It's a data scientist role. You know exactly maybe what skills are going to be asked. If you don't know what skills are going to be asked or what questions are going to be asked for the interview, just ask the recruiter. They should tell you. If they don't tell you, then I don't know, just message with employees on LinkedIn and ask them. But basically, the goal is to eventually get to a point where you understand where you're going to walk into the interview and know what kind of questions and topics are actually going to be asked for that, right? And if you have multiple interviews, then that's great, but then you've got to combine them all into focusing on what subjects you actually want to study, because you don't want to study all those 8 to 10 topics, right? You're going to want to study like very focused studying, because it's about optimizing your studying plan for the interviews coming up, and not actually spending your time on stuff that's not going to matter. So the second part really is about kind of benchmarking skills, and one of the core things that I try to push people away from is using Google as a source of knowledge for understanding the different kinds of questions that come up on the interview. So this is not a great example of SQL interview questions from Google, because they will actually give you stuff like, what you'll see in that search engine results are stuff like, what are joins, and that's not actually typical of an actual SQL interview, right? Regular SQL interviews have case studies that actually come up with, an example schema, and then they ask you to like solve this question within like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on the level of the skill of the interview that you're going for. One of the common roles, actually, like at Amazon Business Intelligence Engineer or something, they hired like hundreds of these roles every single year, right, from master's students and from different kind of undergraduate programs. What they would do every single time is they basically give you 45 minutes. There'd be someone on the other side, and they basically ask you, like, all right, here's a SQL question, and it'd be a simple, solution where you have to like select from something where maybe like a having clause as well. And then if you solve that one, they'd give you another question that was a little bit harder, that involved that same question in the same schema, except this time it'd be like a self-join. And you kind of see where I'm going, but essentially what happened would be, if you couldn't solve all 5 questions by that 45-minute limit, then you wouldn't pass that initial first hiring bar. And the key thing here is that you'd have to solve that first problem within like 2 or 3 minutes to make time for the rest of the problems that got increasingly harder. So a lot about benchmarking your skill here is understanding like, what level of knowledge do I have to be at with SQL and solving these case studies and solving these different kinds of technical problems for me to be able to then pass this kind of technical interview that comes up within a lot amount of time. And it's not just about doing it correctly, it's about actually doing it quickly as well. And so benchmarking your own skills against these problems is a great way to understand, okay, this question got asked at Amazon or Google before, I can complete this in 20 minutes, it's an easy problem, I should probably get it down to like 5 or 10 on average. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do with the interview career as well, is just trying to understand if you guys can solve these problems, but understanding yourself really about benchmarking your own skills in preparation for these interviews coming up. Another really helpful tip, though, I would say, is using ChatGPT for a lot of these kinds of SQL problems as well. So while Google is pretty bad, ChatGPT is actually great for generating different kinds of practice problems on top of these existing ones, or actually trying different kinds of problems as well, or asking them for SQL problems. You do have to give it a little bit more prompts, but FYI, it's a great tool. We've used it ourselves a lot. Another example of one is a case study. So, they're not going to ask you definition-based questions at these companies. A lot of it in data science is about giving case studies about different scenarios. And for this one, this is a really common kind of product analytics case study, and then asking you to kind of dive into your analysis. And a lot of this is also very similar, right? They're looking for a very specific kind of structured statement. I remember the first time I got a case study question, I had no idea how to answer it, and I just, presented some sort of thing like just A/B test it. It's all good. Like that's what we need to do. And then I failed that interview at LinkedIn because obviously there's like a whole analysis that you really have to do with these case studies in terms of how you structure your answers, how you kind of clarify the scenario, how you kind of work through all the problem as well. All right, so after you kind of benchmark your skills at different levels, right, and you kind of have an understanding of what you're good at, what you're bad at, what you need to study a lot more on, then it's time to just kind of build a daily study plan. The best advice I can give here is to just continuously build habits into studying for interview questions, especially if you have an interview coming up. It's much easier also to basically learn data science through bite-sized problems. So all these interview questions are basically like 15 minutes to an hour a day per question, depending on how hard it is. And so if you do just 15 minutes of it and read the problem even, think about it in your head on how to solve it, I highly recommend writing stuff down because it's much easier to then like learn if you actually write stuff down and actually write down your answer to things versus kind of thinking about it and being like, oh, okay, yeah, I got that, yeah, I think I know how to do this. So much easier if you write it down, right? Because then you're forced to put like pen to paper in terms of what you're thinking about and how you're structuring your answers as well. But almost always doing it as a daily study habit is always the best way. We've seen marginally and actually a lot more incremental improvements from success rate when we look at the number of questions people study. And it's really hard for you to study like 80 plus questions in the week before the interview or even 2 days before the interview, right? It's a lot easier to do 80 questions over like 2 months before the interview and do it incrementally so you build on that knowledge. So I would just highly recommend this. And this is from the exit survey data that we've seen from Interview Query over time, that just the more work you put into it, the better success you have post-interview. Now, I think that's pretty obvious, but a graph always helps showcase that a little bit better. So the best way to do that, and this is kind of like a quick rule, is to make solving questions really easy in terms of just being able to easily get it, and to solve one question a day, and then just to practice on increasingly harder problems until you're realizing that down the line you find that you're solving that SQL question a lot faster than before. Lastly is getting interview feedback. So I put up a rubric of kind of a score evaluation framework that we use after you find that you feel well prepared. Let's say that you studied interview questions for a few months now, you're ready for your interview coming up, or you're getting a few interviews in the next few weeks. Basically, the 1 week to 2 weeks before your actual interview, I highly recommend doing as many mock interviews as possible. And the reason for that is because it is very different than basically practicing in person with the actual interviewer across from you or next to you, like on a whiteboard, than it is when you're actually just on your computer solving the same question. And I've seen this multiple times. Right? I've had a candidate that was like, basically worked at a startup, developed their own Python library that was used by thousands of people, had an interview at Google coming up, did an interview with me, and we were just tasked with doing like FizzBuzz, and he just freaked out because it was in person and because I was watching him through the camera, the video camera, and I could see that he was kind of shaking. Just doing it like in person is actually really difficult, and you don't realize that when you have someone else kind of watching you and actually trying to judging you on your like code, right, in the way that you're writing your code, versus if you're just solving it on your own. So I highly recommend doing as many mock interviews as possible. It's a great practice for emulating that interview experience. So instead of just failing a bunch of interviews in person, you can just fail a bunch, with your friends or with different people alumni, coaches, whatever, before you actually get to that first interview that you care about, right? And a couple bits on like score evaluation here. So our focus for like all the non-technical, not non-technical, but more like case study based questions. We're talking about machine learning case studies, business case studies, even kind of any kind of analytical case study. We do judge it on kind of these 3 main criteria that we see across the board, which is, one is business intuition, right? So we're talking about how well are you structuring your answers that are applied to the business, right? And so if you jump straight into like a technical piece on how you're gonna build a model, and then you don't really realize that your model wouldn't work for the actual business at hand, then they're gonna decrease your points there, because this is kind of on the grading rubric in terms of how you can work within the industry and within the team. General communication is huge, so just not rambling for a really long time. We've had a lot of candidates who have come in, they kind of they think of one idea and they just go down a rabbit hole, right? And then they suddenly think of another idea in that rabbit hole and they go down a sideways rabbit hole. And then by the end of it, they haven't answered the question at all. So just being able to structure your answer and having like a beginning, like a meat section where you're going through the different bullet points and then actually coming through and answering it, and then actually staying within time as well, and just having good structure in place is awesome. Lastly, technical sense. This is pretty much the most straightforward. It's just being able to explain advanced technical details easily and intuitively, and being able to be correct about your answer, right? And I think this one's a little bit more binary and a little bit easier to understand for everyone. So, general interview timeline and logistics. This is actually something I'd love to go over to. Is just the example interview has always been an initial screen with a recruiter, where basically they just fit you in with basically understanding if your resume matches the actual role, and if you lied about your resume, their job is to figure out if you actually did, how much of that is actually truthful on your resume versus if it is the right fit to then pass to the hiring manager. So recruiters, at bigger companies and at better companies, the better recruiters are almost always really good at taking some of those questions that the hiring managers were going to call and actually give to you and do them in the initial screen, right? And if you think about it, the good recruiters are actually, they care about their own kind of funnel here, right? They just want to send really good candidates to the hiring managers so that the hiring managers can be excited about talking to them. The technical screen usually does happen with a hiring manager interview or with a engineer or data scientist on the team. And so half the time it'll be a hiring manager that basically kind of maybe talks about technical discussions, goes more into the previous projects and kind of understand the nuances between your resume and like the technical work that was there, versus maybe just a technical screen where we're talking about doing like SQL questions or coding or kind of figuring out that you can pass that technical bar. Lastly, we do have an on-site interview, and though probably more common before that, it would be a take-home challenge for a lot of master's students and entry-level roles, I would say. And we can talk more about those later, but they definitely take anywhere from an hour to 10 hours to complete, and then obviously an offer after the on-site interview. And so last thing I have an inquiry demo, but I'd actually like to do a Q&A instead, or just answer any questions before jumping into it. I don't know if we need to do a demo, but would love to answer questions first, and then if possible, or if we have extra time, could do a demo as well if that's helpful. But yeah, that's kind of it, and I'd love to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, so if you have questions, please come to either mic and go ahead and ask so everybody can hear your question.
Hey, oh yeah, and if you can introduce yourself first, that'd be great.
Yeah, my name's Matt. I'm going to be graduating in May, NSD student. Can you go back to the timeline question, or timeline slide, like slide?
Yeah, sure.
Is that the typical timelines for the entry level roles, or is that more like senior level?
Yeah, so I would say it really depends, but I don't think it changes much for entry or senior level that much, except for maybe adding or removing a take-home challenge in there. So generally how companies work also is that they have to provide consistent interview processes for every candidate, regardless of like the seniority of their skills. So if they open up like a senior position and a junior position, then they can give the junior position a take-home challenge and not give one to the senior role, right? But if they open up one role and it says data scientist and they take it senior and junior candidates, then they have to give everyone in that role one interview process. So they have to give everyone therefore a technical challenge or a take-home challenge, even if regardless if they have 10 years of experience or like 0 years of experience. But yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I think with COVID, it changed a little bit, so the on-site interview happened to be more like flexible, especially if it's a remote job. So you could do basically like, 2 hours here and then another 2 hours there. But I think most people understand that it's hard to take, an entire day off work or something else to do an on-site interview now.
Hello. Again, I'm Adam. Same business. So kind of bouncing off that question, that answer you just gave. How often would you say, so when I interviewed at CrowdStrike, one of their big things was the interviews, some of them actually apologized to me because they were like, start, we use this STAR methodology. I have to ask you, like, I have to get these kinds of answers here. And so, would you recommend like studying these kinds of like interview practices, like whatever? I've never heard of STAR before, or you know, I guess that's one question.
Yeah. So there's actually a ton of different frameworks. STAR is super common, and it's one I remember. It's like situation, task, action, result.
Yeah.
In terms of framing your answer for behavioral interview questions or something where I ask you about a previous project. And so I think it's really good because it helps you out with, like we use frameworks every single day for just stuff that allows us to, solve problems a little bit quickly, right? Like just quicker. And so if you have the STAR framework, it's super helpful for that because you can basically take every single bit of your like past experience instead of telling 5 different stories. You can just tell one story with the situation at hand, the task that you had to do, the action, and then the result that you gave, right? And so I highly recommend frameworks. We use them for product metrics interviews as well as analytics interviews, right? So we have like a clarification, assumptions, and then we have results, and then kind of like next questions kind of phase for that, right? So I think in general frameworks are super helpful. The most popular ones probably definitely memorize and use. Amazon has a leadership question kind of framework as well. That's super helpful for behavioral interviews. Basically, just going through and just finding a story for every single time you demonstrated each one of these leadership principles. Especially if they ask you different questions, you have to come up with different stories. But yeah, I highly recommend frameworks because they're super helpful for this.
Cool, thank you. And then my actual question was, how important would you say it is to follow like buzzwords and stuff like that in terms of like your knowledge? Like, should we expect as data scientists to get 5 questions about LLMs in an interview, for instance? Maybe not 5, but go ahead.
Yeah. So keeping up to date buzzwords. I think it really depends on the job, and it's not a great answer, but I would say most of the time, like there's a few like key buzzwords that I see come up again and again, right? So maybe I'll give that an example. Like people are always interested in like different kinds of data visualization tools, right? Like they're like, oh, do I have to learn Looker? Do I have to learn like Spark or Databricks or these other certifications for Tableau? And I don't think so at all. Like I don't think those come up for interview questions. Like if they ask you also, like, do you know how to use Looker? You could always just say yes, right? And they won't actually pull out Looker and ask you to start moving stuff around. Because at the end of the day, all this stuff is like easily learned. So if you know data visualization in general, I think it's very easy for you to then pick up any one of these other tools. Same if you are talking about like data warehousing or using Snowflake or using Databricks, right? Like if you know one of them, then you're going to know how to use the rest of them, and you're going to know how to like eventually onboard onto them. So I wouldn't say like the buzzwords are super important. I think topics like LLMs and like like the new like ChatGPT stuff, that's good to be like on top of just in general, but I don't think it'll require a lot of stuff on your part in terms of having previous experience or like understanding how to use them in depth.
Then with that answer, you would say then that if you do get asked something like that, it's very easy to pivot to like the core subject to show expertise and answer the question that way.
Yeah. I think honestly, the most of the time that where they ask you that is in the recruiter screening, right? Because the recruiters don't know as much about, let's say, the core concepts behind data science as maybe the hiring managers or the actual employees there, right? So, for example, what they're doing is they see that the job description requires Snowflake knowledge or Spark or something like that, and they'll probably mention that in the recruiter call and ask you, like if you have experience with that or if you just know how to use it. And I think most of the time, if you have used something similar, then it's not something, like you can always answer like, oh, I haven't used that before, but I've done something similar in the past. But it's not very binary where it's like yes or no and then your actual interview. I think it's much more like, what they're really trying to ask you is like, can you get up to date and onboarded very quickly within our system because we use these tools, right? And that's all that really matters, I think.
Thank you.
My name is Alfred and I'm also an MSc student. My question is related to the phase which is even before that first recruitment call.
Sorry, could you speak up or
Right, sorry.
closer to the mic?
So my question is about the phase which is even before the interview, which is basically making sure that the resume is read. So a lot of times in the job descriptions, you will see you need experience in Python, R, Scala, Java, 10 other languages. And all these systems generally, instead of taking these keywords as or, they tend to take these as and conditions, and you kind of get a low score, which automatically makes your CV score low and you kind of gets rejected. So in such situations, what should you do with respect to your CV?
Okay, so you're saying that when you apply to a job, they basically do some keyword matching, right, on your resume, and then they rank your resume lower or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Like
So,
another example can be like you need cloud experience in AWS, GCP, Azure, all three written, right? But probably it's just or condition in the job description, but in the ATS system, they're taken as you need to have all three of these experiences. So automatically your score gets low because you don't match those keywords.
gotcha. Yeah, so I want to say keyword stuffing makes sense here either, right? Like that's the immediate solution that I would think of, right? Is that you just add a bunch of keywords to your resume, which doesn't really help anyone, in my opinion. I also think that, in my opinion, applying to jobs earlier before they're posted is a better usage system than applying to jobs maybe and optimizing your resume for keywords and other things like that for the job role. And the reasoning behind that to me is that I don't think that, I wouldn't say that most ATS systems maybe value that a lot unless you have some knowledge around maybe how recruiters do it, right? Like I think for potentially like very specific roles, like if you think about like a data cloud engineer, right, where you basically, this is required as a field versus like a nice to have, then are they gonna look for cloud in your resume? Yeah, probably, and they'll probably review those resumes first. But if you're looking for general data science roles, maybe entry level roles, I don't think that's expected as much. So in my opinion, I don't think it matters as much as just getting on top of jobs when they're applied early, because I think a lot of people apply to jobs that are basically over like 7 days old. And then by that point, the hiring managers or the recruiters might not even be reviewing the resumes anymore because they've already gotten like 1,000 applicants. And the stats that I see online at least is that when when companies are posting jobs nowadays, they get like 500 resumes on the first day or something insane. And I think it's all about really getting ahead of that pack and being like one of the first 100, 200 resumes a lot of the time, if you're going the route of applying to jobs and getting seen through the resume to apply jobs kind of track. I think the better way to do it is to obviously network and talk to other people and find other ways to kind of get your resume through the door. But my opinion is I don't think this really matters that much unless the actual job title is so specific about its requirements and what the job requires it to do within the specific scenario. And those jobs usually aren't like the funnest jobs either, just to add to that.
Hi, my name's John. I'm actually an MSAE, so it's applied economics. And my question is more around, for a lot of us coming out of school, we might not have that extensive experience directly relating to that job. So what are some ways that you've seen interviewees be successful in kind of getting past that little hurdle when a recruiter might ask, or the secondary interview might ask, hey, where's your experience at? And a lot of your experience is in school.
Yeah, so, well, I'll add a caveat to that. So, because I feel like a lot of the times, if you're on that first or second interview, they've already seen your resume, so they probably won't, they'll understand that they're interviewing like a master's student or someone with education. So they might not like try to push you for explaining or asking you like, why don't you have experience? Because they've already, gotten your resume. Now, in terms of like showcasing that you do have experience, let's say, and let's say that you do need to kind of come up with experience, even though you don't have a lot of industry experience. There's like two main ways that I kind of tackle this, which is basically taking what experience you do have in any other kind of background or what kind of job and showcasing a lot more of the data science side to it, right? And this is not like lying, so to speak, but it's a little bit more about kind of embellishing those aspects of your job that were about data science, data analytics, data engineering, or any other kind of experience that you've done. I've done internships where they were completely not data science relevant, but I've changed things in terms of the fact that like I personally worked on projects on my own that during that time that were relevant to data science that I then just kind of featured on my resume because that's what I wanted to get out there and that's what I wanted people to see. I think the second way is, and this is not as good in my opinion, but is talking a little bit more about the kind of past school projects that you've done and kind of talking about those and embellishing those. I think doing that is a little bit harder just because you have to know that like any kind of work experience that you have immediately trumps any kind of, I think educational experience that you have for a project because of the fact that that work experience shows that you can succeed in industry, right? And a lot of the times for our school, we do these projects with data sets that we just get online or that we find that we don't actually have like practical usage. And so that's really hard to really convey that in terms of like how you apply value to anything because when you're in industry, you can apply value to the business and you can demonstrate that through your projects, but when you're in school, it's a little bit harder because it's constrained. So I think the third way that if you can, in the meantime, is just to do side projects, just hack on different things. I think talking about those are really fun because they show that you did an initiative outside of school, outside of work, and I think that gives you a lot more experience as well. But yeah, those are kind of like the 2 or 3 tactics I'd say use. Hopefully that helps answer your question. Cool. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Zeming, and I'm an MSc student. And I have a question regarding to interview query, like more the user experience. I started to do some learning path, like data science, data engineering, and I have some issue, like for example, for SQL question, I feel like the solution is not like preferably like there's only like one type of solution. So like maybe the same question can solve like a window function or non-window function. Then probably there's not the solution is not like clear enough sometimes, and this might be other way, but it's not complete. I feel like the interview query compared to other platform, like what would you suggest like for us, or what you can do to better increase the user experience?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you some hacks that I use, and obviously, because I'm hacking our own website, it's not good. It should just be the experience that you have. But I will let me sign up and just kind of show you what some options you can do. I'm always signed in, so I'm
You want to sign into mine?
yeah, you signed in yours.
Yeah.
Great, visual. Yes. All right, so for SQL interview questions, let me find something popular. Filters, look at databases. So one thing that I use is like, okay, so if you feel like, this is not the most optimal solution, I think there's 2 options here. One is like, you can jump into the comments and kind of read the top comments here, which, you can do, you can sort by top rated, recently commented, all this stuff like that. The second one, specifically for SQL and Python, is you can actually go to other people's submissions here. So you can see this is my submissions for a Victor's user. But if you go to accepted user submissions, you can actually just read what other people have submitted and what they've tried that's doing well. And so we are working actually to maybe optimize this based on like runtime. I wouldn't actually say runtime though is a great metric for SQL more than anything else because it really varies. It's not like with coding and long lead code, you have like top 10% of runtime or memory usage and stuff like that. That doesn't really happen as much on SQL. But we are going to try to find a metric to kind of find maybe more optimal solutions essentially in terms of actual performance. Hi.
Hi, it's Feng, and I'm a MSDS student. So my question was, based on what you just said for the job application, should we try to apply for those like jobs that are published a few days ago as much as possible, rather than we like try those like job published longer?
Yes.
Like longer before.
I highly recommend that. And again, it kind of comes back to the idea around understanding a few things in terms of like that, realistically, when we publish jobs, we get a lot of applicants for data science type postings. Some of them don't as much, and it's also kind of about like, what's your goal, right? Like, is your goal to like get a job at like a top company? Well, then you know that there's going to be a lot of top applicants applying for those jobs, right? But if you want a job at like for example, I'm going to go to the job board right now, and I'm going to find this one, Marketing Analytics Manager in Chicago, right? And I don't know if that salary estimate is actually right, but I guarantee you that like not that many people have applied to this job specifically, right? And like it's not a bad job necessarily, but like, yeah, 5 applicants 3 days ago, right? Like, if your job is to get any job, you could apply to this job and get it, right? Or it would probably stand out, I would say, potentially. But I think that's just like kind of like the general vibe is that like you have to understand where you fall on the scale of different things, right? Because different kinds of jobs are going to bring in different kinds of like levels of knowledge and stuff. So. Yeah, this is an interesting job.
6 years experience.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I mean, so I talked to a lot of different, like my friend works in the recruiting space in like a lot of different areas. Like I just said you went on Washington right here, and like you said, like okay, we want to find the jobs that are most recent. But is LinkedIn really the best space for us to be looking for work? And then also, like, do you find more success directly going through LinkedIn, or do you see more success going directly through a website? Because I've seen differences on success ratios based on those two things.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I'll address the second one first because I kind of forgot your first question, but I'll go for that. I don't think there's a difference between the two, and the reason why is because all of them, they all use ATS systems in the back end, right? So they're all using like Greenhouse or like, literally if I go back to this job, actually let me look at this, and we go to the actual job, let's see, let's go to the apply. Oh, oops, no. Actually, maybe we could open this up somewhere else. It's going to apply Victor to a bunch of jobs. Okay, this is great. Okay, Walmart, right? All right, okay, this is ours. So but either way, so what this company is doing, right? Higher income jobs. Basically, what they're doing is they're taking your application, they're ingesting it, they're sending it to Walmart, right? And Walmart on their back end has like one ATS service they use for all of this. So at the end of the day, I don't think it matters. I think maybe you might have to like sign up for less flows potentially if you go to the Walmart actual ATS system. But when you're applying to a job, understand that you are applying through one channel, and that all these companies have invested a lot into making sure that this channel is extremely streamlined, right? So that if you're applying to the actual job, whether it's on LinkedIn or on this site, it's all going to be through the applying to job channel. Now, if you send your resume directly to the recruiter, that's a different channel completely, right? That's completely different, and you can do that through LinkedIn and message them. But when you apply to a job, I don't think there's any distinction between where you're actually applying to, whether it's on LinkedIn, Indeed, or any of these sites, because they all end up at the same kind of ATS channel where you're looking at all their resumes, right? It'd be weird if you had like different channels and recruiters had to go to different places to find their resumes, right? It's different now, yeah. It might have been like that before, but I think now the technology has consolidated.
Yeah, I guess what I was bringing is like sometimes smaller companies don't necessarily have a large recruiting team, and so they might be more on an individual basis. Like when they're speaking to you, like they want to actually be like, okay, we have all these applicants that come through. These are all our LinkedIn applicants. Like I'm pretty sure it flags, right? Like I mean, at least that's what I thought when I talked to my recruiters before. It kind of shows you like what channel it's come through and how it's gone there.
Yeah, and that's for the companies to then find out where they should apply to jobs later and pay for LinkedIn or not pay for LinkedIn, right? Because if LinkedIn doesn't send them any candidates, then they're gonna be like, I'm not gonna pay like $500 a month for LinkedIn Premium, I'm just gonna use Indeed instead, right, and pay for that. So it's actually more like a marketing analytics attribution than I would say like a way for them to find, for you to get an edge in terms of getting quality applications in. Now, yeah, on their side, you know, if they get a bunch of bad applicants from LinkedIn, then they're not gonna use LinkedIn that much anymore, and that's just kind of how they use it for attribution.
So my first question was about like where we're searching for those, and so like obviously your site's attached to LinkedIn here, but like what are some other sites or ways that you found are successful besides LinkedIn, because it's such an easy tool to use? Like you might be getting things that are like, obviously everyone's able to see that immediately. So like, are there different ways that you look for jobs and finding like the most recent posts?
Yeah, so so I mean, I'll tell you about what I've done before. I can't say that there's like that many amazing job boards out there. I think they're all pretty much the same. I mean, for us, all we did was we optimized the jobs by like aggregating from Indeed, LinkedIn, some other websites, and then we just added a few filters that are all data science specific. Now, if you want to use, I think one way that people don't use, maybe Indeed or LinkedIn or any of these job boards really helpful, is just to use like different hacks like Boolean search keywords, right? So like, let's say that I want a data analyst job, right? But then I also want to, I want to find data analyst jobs that include Python, because then they're going to be more like data science jobs, right? So this is what I did before when I was looking for my first data science job, was find a data analyst job that was like Python heavy or like use specific skills that I want. You can use this Boolean search to narrow it down more so that you don't get like these weird data analyst jobs that don't require Python and maybe are only Excel based, right? But instead find data analyst jobs that are more like Python based. So I think using Boolean search is underrated. I don't know if people know how to use Boolean search that much. You can use a lot of things. You can search different things in here. You can like basically use and or different kinds of like SQL kind of functions. But as you can see, like this first job right here is like pretty good. It uses Python or Snowflake. 1+ years of professional experience, stuff like that. I think it's super helpful. That being said, if you want to use our job board, we do have a sponsors visa column. Basically what we did was we ingested a bunch of data from the H-1B data set and then just try to figure out which companies actually did sponsor historically. It's very difficult, I know, to find jobs that sponsor, so hopefully this does help in your job search. All right.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, we should understand where we are in the applicants, right? Like among the applicants. So
Sorry, can you say that louder?
You mentioned that we should understand like where we are among all the applicants.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little more, like how?
Yeah. So I guess what I was saying for that was like, let's say that you want to apply to a super, like something like Google or Microsoft or historically one of these companies that has done like super well in the past, right? I don't know if I have one example right here. These jobs are super coveted, right? So in general, like they have brand recognition. Most people apply to those jobs just because they have that brand recognition. And you're also going to get a lot of other people that maybe have experience, maybe even mid-level data scientists or senior data scientists that are going to apply for those same roles. So what I was trying to say was that basically, if you're looking for, if you want to understand your own goal first in terms of what kind of job you want. Like obviously, most people want to get the best or highest paying job that they can for their existing experience level, right? And then understand how much work you're willing to put into it, right? So you might be able to do that if you applied to like 1,000+ jobs and then went through the interview process for every single one of them, and then eventually decided on an offer, right? Or if you don't want to put in that much work to get a job, maybe you're okay with this salary range, it's not as high, then you can find a lot of these different kinds of jobs that are out there, like the one that we just saw, right, that had 5 applicants in 3 days, right? It's a lot less competitive as well. And it just really kind of depends on how you optimize it. But having an understanding of the general market, understanding of the general competitiveness of any individual job is pretty crucial.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, my name is Chen Xi, and I'm looking for like data scientist or machine learning engineer jobs. My question is, like you mentioned before, especially for the entry level or like junior data scientists, sometimes there will be like online assessment or take home assignment. I'm wondering like what questions or content will we be expecting like for the like different roles like data scientist or machine learning engineer, like what the difference between those, especially for the online assessment or take home assignment part.
Yeah, so historically, I think machine learning engineers, for their take-home assignments, they've either been required to basically build like a working ML model and basically host it on like some service that they have that's like free, and then demonstrate that you can like send JSON back and forth between it. That's a pretty common take-home challenge task. I also think it's pretty common now to just do like a work trial even with a company. So you would like, for 8 hours, they would pay you, or maybe even 20 hours, and then you'd be designated to the project, and then you have to do it. For entry-level folks though, I think there's a lot more screening involved. So what it kind of relates more to is basically doing more of like a 1 hour, 2 hour assignment. Maybe it's through HackerRank, or maybe they have a rubric. But for data science roles, it can be anything from like analyze this data set, or like, for example, let me go over here to take home's Uber Data Science Challenge. Basically, it's like, let's like basically do some experiment in metrics design, and then this one is like data analysis, right? So basically, predicting driver signups that are more likely to start driving, explore this data, present it, give some examples. So that's a pretty good example here. I think there's an actual one from DoorDash that was more of like the example that I was thinking of with a machine learning model. So yeah, so I think this one is more of a machine learning engineer. So it's like writing an application to make predictions using that model, right? So part one is that you model the data, you code, you data process it, and then part two is you showcase your software engineering skills. So this is literally like use a production ready language, you can look at the description, and then part two, you said write an application that accepts data from JSON file. Okay, so yeah, that's what I was using on. So basically, it's like literally host your model somewhere in the cloud, and then allow you to like send and get back JSON from the model that you just built. So pretty good examples of both. Hopefully this answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm an SDS student in USF as well. And so my question is like, how do you tackle the time allocation between the referral and the apply through system? Because as you say, right now, actually when you have one position open one day, maybe there are 500 applicants. But actually you take time to get a referral, maybe 2 days or 3 days. But maybe every 2 days or 3 days, there's already 2,000 applicants. How do you take this kind of trade-off when you apply for a job?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're applying for a referral, that's actually a different application channel, right? So you might not be competing against like 1,000 or maybe 2,000 applicants potentially. So I think how it usually works is that if I refer someone to this job, right, then I send over the resume to the recruiter. Then you're more like it's not that you're competing against 1,000 people that applied, it's more like you're competing against every other resume that the recruiter has seen, because all you're getting is basically a recruiter to see this resume of yours, right? That's what referrals really get you. They can't really get you through the interview process, they'll just look at your resume. So you might be actually just competing against like 100 or 200 resumes that the recruiter has spent that day like looking at, and then comparing your resume against that pile. So I think about it more like that in terms of like understanding how the job application process works for referrals. If that makes sense.
So, as your opinion, like if we can get a referral, will be a best idea when you job application?
I think so. I mean, now you're guaranteeing that a recruiter is going to look at it, right? Unless your friend who's referring you has referred a bunch of trash to this recruiter, and then the recruiter doesn't trust your friend anymore, right? So, I mean, it just depends, right? So I would say, yes, if the recruiter is willing to look at your resume, then they will, that's all you're getting as a guarantee, is that the recruiter is going to look at your resume, or the hiring manager is going to look at your resume. That's it, yeah.
Hello again. One of the things you mentioned kind of sparked a new question for me. So right now on LinkedIn, my filters are easy apply, smash the button as much as possible.
Mhm.
And then you reminded me that, oh yeah, I should care a little bit more than that. And maybe look for more recent job postings. My question is, what are my optimal LinkedIn filters?
Not entirely sure about optimal LinkedIn filters, to be honest, because I haven't used LinkedIn to apply to jobs recently. And actually, I'm not going to go on Matrix account anymore.
Not necessarily LinkedIn, but like, I mean, like, you can kind of maybe think of, you're very familiar with the data, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of general filters would be my optimal filters?
Yeah, so let's go through like the exercise, right? So like, what kind of job do you want, basically?
So yeah, I'm most interested in data science
Okay.
or MLE.
Okay, so let's say data science, machine learning, engineering. Sure, okay. And then you're looking for like entry-level roles, right? Maybe intern position. And then location, you could say.
So you would recommend filtering for entry level for data scientists if you're interested in entry level, even though sometimes, experience levels can be like 20 years experience in data science.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing is that like, yeah, I mean, let's look, how many of these have that right here? Oh, okay, well, this is really good. This one is not. Okay, so this one says 2+ years of experience, right? So I think most people that don't usually say entry level. I mean, what we've done is we've already classified these. We've pre-classified this, so like, even if it does say entry level, and it says associate, we assume that means entry level, right? I mean, you assume that. But again, like, these ones with 2+ years of experience, I think this is a great role to apply to. But it really depends on like what you want to do, right? I mean, I just applied, 3 filters there, and that was it. I'm not sure if that's like what you're looking for. But again, we also pre-sorted this into something recent. It was March 14th, actually. So there aren't that many entry-level data science jobs in San Francisco, it looks like. But if you add a note, hopefully there should be more. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's just not that many entry-level jobs. If you look at mid-level jobs, let's see what happens here. Okay, I'm just gonna go to Indeed. But in general, I think like for example, if we're on Indeed and we do like data scientist, entry level in San Francisco, and we sort by the date posted, or let's say last 3 hours. All right. Well,
The first mistake is in San Francisco, I think. But that's my
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, okay, so one more hack that I would say is like, if you're actually applying to jobs, if you guys don't mind like moving and going to different jobs, I actually think like changing your location on your resume for the location of the job is actually really important. We see this with our job board partners too. They don't think qualified applicants are the ones that are more than like 60 miles away from their location, especially if it's not remote. So if you are willing to move to, let's say, Chicago and apply to this role, it does help that your resume says that you are located in Chicago. And recruiters will like, a lot of the times not, because they literally have to jump on a call with you to then understand, okay, are you willing to move to Chicago? And if you say no, that's wasted time for them, right?
I always put as many friends as I can, and closest friend I have to that location. That's where I live.
Yeah, no, that's good, that's good. Yeah. But yeah, just something to double check, yeah, on your resume too, it should try to say something like that.
Okay, so this will be the last question.
Okay, sorry, a quick one. So currently, if I am improving my resume and I see some jobs that I really want to apply, should I apply as soon as possible or wait for a few days to get my resume better and then apply for that job?
That's a hard question. I would say I'd probably wait to see and improve your resume just a little bit, unless you feel like it's already really strong.
Okay,
Yeah.
so a good resume is important, right?
Yes. Cool. Thank you, everyone.